the Mancherji Edalji Joshi Memorial Trust, Dharmagyan class, has great pleasure in offering a medley of munajats, that is Western devotional songs, in English and Gujarati languages.
These prayerful compositions are mainly dedicated to the God of the Zoroastrian religion, Aura Mazda and their prophet, Zarathustra Pitama.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to another Friday Forum. You were just listening to the children of the Mancheji Joshi Memorial Trust of Dadar singing at the Parliament of World Religions. We'd organized this with Parzor on the 17th and 18th of October when we were presenting at the Parliament. Today is, for me personally, a great validation. Before I introduce Mariano, I was so delighted to find a young researcher whose interests in Zoroastrianism were very, very close to how I originally started with Zoroastrianism. Of course, I'm a practicing Zatushti, but I came to Zoroastrianism through the mystical poet William Blake. And it has always been the mystical side of Zoroastrianism which has appealed to me. We don't often talk about it, but Mariano has been talking to a lot of people who have shared wonderful things with him, all of which he will be presenting in his thesis. He is a PhD candidate at SOAS, University of London, recipient of both the Kamran Jam and Shapurji Palanji scholarships. While he specializes in modern Zoroastrianism and the changes in the Parsi community in the 19th century, he has been working on what I told you, the esoteric currents, which he and I have a debate to continue, which he thinks came into Zoroastrianism in the 19th and 20th centuries with colonial and what he calls the Persianate world. He'll be explaining that to you. Of course, he's presented a lot at lots of conferences, etc., and worked on funerary practices during COVID, something which we all had to face as Zatushtis. Let me tell you why I say that I have a long debate with a lot of people about the issue of esoteric Zoroastrianism. The Magi were the wise men. And from my researches now almost 45 years, the amount of material that I have found, not just in books at the British Library and at various collections across the world, but more in the oral tradition, is something that I want to remind our people about. All of us have a certain spirituality within. And I think we need to learn from Mariano and have his courage in exploring this spirituality. I still remember when he first told me what he was going to do, I said, Mariano, don't even try. You're not going to get any responses. But he's had wonderful responses, and I'm going to give it over to Mariano. But I implore you all to share, be it a Chavi Nirit, be it a Kuono Darvajo. The aim of the Friday forums is to learn and to help our researchers, our experts, and none of us are going to be experts till the end of our days, to help our experts also learn. So I do implore you to share. I can see people already from the Freemasonry world, etc., right here in front of my screen. Welcome, Mariano. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today. Welcome. I'm handing it over to Mariano. Now,
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this very kind introduction, and I'm very delighted to be here in this forum. And thank you to Parzor and Gio Parsi for organizing this Friday's forum and for thinking that this kind of subject, this talk, could be of interest for the community. And personal thanks to you, Dr. Shernas Kama. We have met, I think, 2 years ago in India, in Delhi, before the pandemic. So I've been lucky enough to meet you before the world began to change a bit. And I'm very happy that we are again meeting online, and I hope to come back to India very soon. So let's see how things are evolving. And thank you so much for the support you have given to me in my research when we met, and you keep on giving. And I also would like to thank Mahtab Irani, who has organized this talk and helped in several aspects, from logistics to the visual editing to especially advising me on how to shape the presentation for this talk. So thank you so much, and I will start. I will share my screen. I prepared the presentation. Okay. I think you can see it now.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So I will speak about Freemasonry, Theosophy, Il Maximum, which are not new subjects for Parsis, not at all. So I'm trying to give a new perspective on these esoteric organizations, currents, which emerged between the 19th and 20th centuries in colonial times among the Parsis. I think there's much to really explore and study. And there's also a bit of work to be done in terms of decolonizing the ideas we have about the esoteric, about these groups. And my objective is a bit to share what I've found and also to hear from you what you think. And I'm sure from your personal experiences with these organizations, you can really add a lot to this conversation. So in order to discuss a bit these three groups, I will give a bit of historical context about the Parsis, and I will analyze that period between two major cultural areas, the West and the Persianate world. Not just the West as we usually do, but I will try also to include the Persianate, which I will explain in a bit. Later on, I will speak a bit of the interactions between the Parsis and the Freemasonry, the Parsis and Theosophy, Il Maximum, and which will lead to some concluding remarks. So, just a bit of introduction for those who are not familiar with Parsis, if there is any. Basically, after the Arab conquest of Persia in the 651 Common Era, Zoroastrians began to be persecuted. So groups of them, a few hundred years later, probably, they left and they fled to India and established in Gujarat, where today we still have the biggest community of Zoroastrians in the world. I think the last census says that there are still around a bit less than 50,000 Parsis. They became known as Parsis, and they were able to preserve much of their culture and especially their religion. You can see the little flower in India is more or less the area of Gujarat and a bit of Mumbai. With the arrival of European traders in the 17th century and later on, Parsis became very much involved with the trade with the Dutch, French, Portuguese, but in particular with the British. And here I'm saying that they became the preferred trade partner. And just to share an image, when in the 17th century Bombay began to be built, Parsis were invited by British to join this initiative, together with other communities, obviously, and they began to migrate to Bombay. In that period, there was obviously Fort was the first area of Bombay in the south, and all the other communities, the Khojas, the Hindu, they were living outside Fort. Parsis were the only community which was allowed to live in Fort, and even if today we walk in that area of Bombay, we see many names of Parsis and to streets, to buildings. So it's just a little indicator of how impactful, how strong was this relationship, this proximity between Parsis and British, which at that time were embodying the colonial power. However, as I introduced earlier, I would also like to take in consideration the Persianate world, which basically is this huge geographical area which spans from Iran down to India, and temporally, probably we can consider it from the post-Sasanian times until the 19th century. And here I'm sharing a quote of Ashraf, who considers the Persianate as a shared political culture based upon manuals of statecraft literature, an affinity for antinomian and Sufi tendencies, an appreciation for Persian literature, and a common material culture. And obviously at that time, in the colonial times, Persian was the lingua franca spoken in the Persianate. This was until mid-19th century. And there was a huge production of Persian literature, even in India. The Persianate was a very important cultural area we should take in consideration. And Parsis is a diasporic community from Iran. They were a big player in this cultural area for centuries, not just during the colonial times. And going into 19th and 20th centuries, we know that Parsi and Iranian Zoroastrians were enjoying a strong relations. In particular, Parsis were supporting, helping their Zoroastrian fellows in Iran. We have the example of Manekji Hataria, who was the first emissary of the Society for Amelioration of the Condition of Zoroastrians in Persia. And he was able, for example, to uplift Zoroastrians from the jizya. It was a poll tax for non-Muslim communities. And these interactions obviously were enriched by exchanges, also of religious literature. Hatarian himself, in that period, supported the translation into Gujarati, which was and still is the language spoken by Parsis, the translation into Gujarati of some Persian treaties. So there was a cultural exchange between these two groups. In the same period, in Iran, we have a very interesting emerging nationalism, which is a bit depicting the Arabs as the responsible for the decay of of Persia from the point of view from the cultural, social, and economical point of view. Mirza Kermani was probably the synthesis of different nationalist souls of Iran in that period. Some of them were advocating scientific progress. Others were more promoting a nationalization of Islam. So Kerman was, in short, proposing a sort of anti-Islamic nationalism, portraying the Arabs as responsible for the decay of that period, in opposition to the glorification narrative of pre-Islamic past, the pre-Islamic past, which obviously refers to Persian empires as well as Persian culture, pre-Islamic Persian culture, with their values, the glory, knowledge, religious knowledge as well. The Shahnameh became very popular in that period. The Yabadi literature associated with the Zarkevan also became very popular. There was a tendency towards the coining pure Persian, coining texts in pure Persian, which was a kind of language devoid of Arabic loanwords. So it was an attempt of purification of the language. So we see all these kind of tendencies, which are very relevant for our talk today. And we often forget that Parsis were in touch with this world, not just with Iran, not just with Persia, but with the whole Persianate for their critical role they were playing in this major cultural area. So in that same period, we have the introduction of technology, which is really changing the game. Not just trains, but even steamships, the telegraph in terms of communication, the printing press, Bombay Samachar being one of the first publication houses of I would say, of Asia, and one of the most prestigious is still actually in operations today. And these changes are really increasing the mobility of people across the Persianate area and even of ideas, carried by people or carried by literature, by books. There was a massification of books in that period. Bombay, Lucknow, Delhi being the main centers. They were printing books in several languages, in Persian, Urdu, and other languages, even Gujarati, for the whole Persian, not just for India. And Bombay obviously was one of these centers, and Parsis were first pioneers in this business. So we see how they are really at the center of the economical and cultural activity of this area. Then, obviously, as we know, the Parsis played a big role in the trade between the East and West. And here we see the image of Jamshedi Jijiboy, one of the pioneers of that trade. What is interesting is that some of that wealth generated by the trade was reinvested within the community for building of hospitals, charitable initiatives, schools, madrasas, etc. Gigi Boy himself donated huge amounts of money for the community. And so we have the emergence of these figures of prominent philanthropists among the community, like Gigi Boy and others. And finally, we have also the engagement with education and scholarship. Here I'm showing a picture of Martin Haug, a German philologist, one of the most influential scholars to the Parsi community. And I'm saying that in particular because in the theological heterogeneity of those years, some group of Parsis were using his linguistic discoveries to legitimate some religious views. And we see an emergence tendency among the Parsis who began to regard scholars almost as theologians. That's not just with Haug, but we see that going on, and I would say also to some extent going on today. On the other side, we have the Western education. At that time, the education was managed by Christian missionaries, and we have this very important figure of John Wilson, a Scottish priest who came in Bombay in 1829. He joined the Scottish Missionary Society. He was targeting the Parsi community. He founded the Oriental Christian Spectator, a journal where he was writing and attacking the Zoroastrian scriptures. And he also founded the English institution, which later on will change name, where many Parsi children were going. Until there was a big scandal in the community, the conversion of two boys, which was not well received by Parsis, and as a consequence, the parents dropped all their children from these schools, which will be again attended by Parsis probably after 20 years. But what is interesting about John Wilson is I think it can be inferred by some of his quotes, or what he says in his books. I'm here sharing a quote. He says, "I'm hopeful that the criticism to which I'm about to submit it will lead the Parsis forever to abandon the faith of Zoroaster." So I think it's very clear the purpose of John Wilson, which is conversion. And Parsis obviously were not very happy with this after having been able to preserve their religion for so many centuries and overcoming so many difficulties. And another quote I would like to share is this one: "There is no end to the number of the objects of their worship. This observation is strikingly applicable to the religious degeneracy which appears among the Parsis." So in which way Wilson is trying to convert Parsis? By ridiculing the religion, by calling Zoroastrianism as a religious degeneracy, by portraying them as superstitious, irrational, etc. The response of the Parsis, obviously Parsis were not happy to be labeled as a degeneracy. Still we see in the journals of that time a very moderate reaction, and in particular I would call this kind of reaction, this response, is a fragmented response, in particular of the Parsi priesthood, which at that time was very much involved in the transmission of knowledge by means of customary ritual performance. So when John Wilson began to attack the scriptures, for example, the Videvdad, there were different groups, different priests publishing our journals to respond to these attacks, but with different approaches, with different contents, even many times contradicting each other, exposing a religious vulnerability within the religion. A consequence of this fragmented response was the emerging need for religious authenticity. At that time, Parsis were asking themselves, to the community, to their priests, what authentic Zoroastrianism is. And given this historical context, given this strong liaison with the Persian world, it was easy to begin reconstructing their identity based on an ancient Iranian identity. So the response to this need was located in the past, was located in the ancient Iran, was located in Persia. So we see at this point the emergence of several groups, not just Orthodox, so-called Orthodox or so-called reformers, but we see a number of groups among the Parsis proposing their own interpretation of the religion. And here in this talk, I'm going to focus on the esoteric forms as a response to this fragmentation, as a response to this need for religious authenticity. And we have both Western and Persian examples. So what I would like to highlight, to make emphasis here, is that the proximity to the West of the Parsis and the attacks of John Wilson triggered the need for religious authenticity, which drove towards the reconstruction of an ancient Iranian identity, which was itself informed by newly introduced colonial sciences to the West, but also from religious tendencies, sciences coming from the Persianate world, which we often ignore, I believe. So let's speak a bit about Parsis and Freemasonry. It's a fascinating story. Freemasonry was established at the beginning of the 18th century in London. Initially, it's associated with secret esoteric orders like the Rosicrucians. Then, with the Enlightenment, it has a rationalist turn. The rituals performed in Freemasonry were based on medieval practices of Mason guilds and also on the narrative of the Temple of Solomon. They were approaching the study of religion and languages through symbolism in order to extract value out of these religious myths and narrative in a universal fashion, in order to reveal universal values like charity, benevolence, brotherhood. The first lodge in India was established in 1729, and it was in Delhi. I think this lodge started in the east. The seal I'm showing here in the slide. And it became, initially it was a very useful platform for the British officers, which were using this lodge when arriving in India to connect with other officers, to receive help in loco, and to start integrating locally. So it became basically a platform for connecting the imperial center with the peripheries of the colony, from a British perspective, obviously. Then I would like to introduce the figure of Manekji Kurseggi. Educated according to English standards, he became an important businessman, a judge, and a philanthropist of Bombay. He was invited by a Scottish Freemason, James Barnes, to join Freemasonry, which he tried, but his admission was denied in 1841. This James Barnes was the Grand Master of all Scottish Freemasonry in India, quite an important figure in Freemasonry in India. However, he was not admitted. So, in response to that, Kurseggi, who was a very resilient man, traveled to France and got initiated into Freemasonry in Paris. So he came back to Bombay and again tried to be admitted to join the Lodge Perseverance of Bombay, and again he was denied. So it's a very interesting story of resilience of Kurseggi. This episode obviously exposed the inconsistency of the Masonic lodges in India, which on the one hand were promoting universal values like brotherhood. On the other hand, were not allowing non-British to join the organization. So there was a debate. Kurseggi triggered a debate within Freemasonry, and some Freemasons, together with him, decided to establish a lodge called the Lodge of Rising Star of Western India. And Kurseggi was obviously a very important figure, one of the pioneers of this lodge, one of the founders. And the first initiate was a Parsi, the shipbuilder Ardashir Wadia. And they began to initiate non-British to the Freemasonry, even Muslim later and Hindu with the years. However, Parsis were very attracted by this organization, and we see with time many Parsis joining the Freemasonry, especially this lodge. And here I'm sharing some important influential figures within the community, which were Freemasons as well. K.R. Kama, a very important scholar, a businessman and philanthropist, and then after having studied Avesta and Pahlavi in France and Germany, became the pioneer, we would say the father of Parsi scholarship. He was initiated into the Lodge Rising Star of Western India in 1854. He was the son-in-law of Kurseggi and most probably was invited by him. What is interesting of Kama is that he introduced something new in Freemasonry. For example, the celebration of the Jamshedi Nowruz in a Masonic fashion, And he had a very important career within Freemasonry. He was even nominated Grand Master Honorary of the Grand Provincial Lodge of the Scottish Freemasonry in India, and was one of the big figures of Freemasonry in India. Another one is J.J. Modi, invited by Kama himself, a priest and a very important scholar who studied in the Gigi Boy Avesta Pahlavi Madrasa, and is recognized as one of the most decorated Parsis in the history. He was initiated in 1899 in the same lodge and participates actively to the Masonic activities, publications, conferences, and even edits the Kama Masonic Jubilee volume in honor of K.R. Kama. Now, I think we have enough evidences to make the case for a Parsi Freemasonry. And why I'm saying that? Because in 1864, Parsis covering all the charges and roles in the Lodge Rising Star of Western India. They are basically leading, administrating, managing this lodge. Meetings were run in English, in Gujarati and Persian because of the audience, because of the membership. What is very interesting is that the Avesta was placed next to the Bible on the Masonic altar, and passages of the Avesta were reciting at the beginning and at the end of the lodge meetings. Here we see a passage from a book of Wadia on the Lodge Rising Star of Western India, where he recounts that K.R. Kama donated a copy of the Zen Avesta of Professor Westergaard to the lodge. This is quite interesting and is not well known by people, by scholars at least, that the Avesta was placed next to the Bible. Is a big indicator of peer-to-peer relations between Parsis, British, and between also these two religions. And some Masonic rituals of those lodges where Parsis were going were adapted to make them acceptable for the Parsis. And finally, we have an emergence of numerous lodges for the exclusive use of Parsis. Here I'm sharing one of the lodges, Lodge Cyrus. We have lodges Zarathustra and Darius, and many other lodges which carry Iranian Zoroastrian names, and some of them are basically count on membership, on Parsi membership. So why Parsi Freemasonry? Because Parsis had a huge impact on Freemasonry, on this organization, to the point of placing the Avesta on the altar next to the Bible. So I'm trying to overcome the idea that there was a westernization process, a cultural transfer from the West to the East, from the West to the Parsis in one direction. I think we have seen how with the Freemasonry, Parsis showed a certain leadership. Another interesting element is the language, the use of vernacular, Gujarati, or even the Persian, and philanthropy. They were investing, they were not investing, they were donating a lot of money to open up new lodges and to run the activities of the organization. So they, to some extent, led the way towards a de-Christianization of Freemasonry. That's why we can speak about the Parsi Freemasonry, trying to overcome the idea of acculturation, but rather speaking about transculturation. The West obviously brought this organization to India, but the Parsis were not just passively receiving this organization and just being a member. No, they entered, they changed it, they adapted it. So there's a counter influence. That's why I'm trying to make the case for Parsi Freemasonry. And we see a similar pattern even with Theosophy. So when we go into Theosophy, what is the Theosophical Society? Founded by Elena Blavatsky, a Russian occultist, and Harry Olcott, an American colonel, in 1875 in New York. After running some activities there and very much involved in spiritism and also some mesmerism, they locate the place where still ancient wisdom is alive in India. So they decided to move their headquarters to India, and they relocated to Bombay in 1879. The objectives of the society changed along the years, but we can resume then in these 3 points. They were interested in developing occult abilities among the members, in reviving, obviously, the ancient esoteric teachings, the wisdom, and establishing a universal brotherhood. How they were doing that? By studying the books of Blavatsky, by organizing conferences, talks, engaging with the local religions, studying local religions, languages. And also they used, as the Christians were doing and many other organizations, they were using the printing press to spread a bit their beliefs. In this case, they launched the national, not just in India, actually, it was also read in Europe and in the US, the Theosophist, a magazine where Blavatsky was the editor at the beginning, then many Theosophists, even Parsis, were publishing. Locally, the first lodge which was established was in Bombay, was the Bombay branch of the Theosophical Society in 1879, which changed the name into Blavatsky Lodge in 1891. The first president was a Parsis, obviously. His name was Shroff, and many Parsis began to join this organization. This lodge also launched its own journal called Parsis, which will change name. And even in this journal, like on the Theosophists, we have Parsis publishing articles, especially about Zoroastrianism and Theosophy. So we see again how printing press became an important means to propagate some ideas. And again, we see the important use of vernacular. In 1900, Bilimoria, Nastarvanji Bilimoria launched the Gujarati magazine Cherag, again engaged very much with Zoroastrianism and Theosophy. The picture I'm showing here is not the first edition, is the silver jubilee volume edited by the Sun, but Nastarvanji Bilimoria was one of the prominent Theosophists of that time. And we see that from the beginning of the establishment of this lodge until the beginning of the 20th century, 2 presidents, 8 secretaries, treasurers, librarians were all Parsis. This is a very strong indicator of how they were really involved in the activities of the societies, not just as a passive member, but actively managing the organization. And together with Bilimoria, we have other important figures like the solicitor J.J.V. Madalal, and Kame himself became a member of the Theosophical Society for a while. And again, they were promoting these ideas through conferences, publications in Gujarati and in English on Theosophy and Zoroastrianism. Here we see a book of Wadia on the message of Zoroaster, which is an inquiry on this Zoroastrian religion from a theosophical perspective. Finally, last element is philanthropy. Even with Theosophy, Parsis were quite generous. They gave generous endowments. Here in the picture, we see the Zoroastrian shrine built at the Theosophical Society headquarters in Adyar, which was financed by Parsis. And this is just a small thing. They really made huge donations, even in terms of in-kinds, books. And so we see a similar patterns of engagement of Parsis with Theosophy, similar to that with Freemasonry. There is an undisputed leadership. They were not just passive members and they were enjoying the activities of the organization, but they were leading the organization. The use of vernacular, the use of Gujarati, the printing press was quite important, and philanthropy. Again, this is an evidence that there was not just a monodirectional cultural transfer from the West to the Parsis, but Parsis entered these organizations and changed them. And the case here, which is very interesting for Theosophy, is, for example, the revival of the literature associated with the Persian mystic Khazar Kaivan, the mystic of the 16th, 17th centuries. Actually, this kind of literature, translated into Gujarati, began to circulate in the theosophical circles, in theosophical publications, even on Cherag. We have many extracts from the Dasatir, clearly showing how the Parsis themselves were influencing the internal debate within Theosophy on the quest for ancient wisdom, including this knowledge from the Persianate. So again, when we analyze the interaction of Parsis with this Western organization, we cannot just look at the West and the Parsis. We need to expand a bit our view, include the Persianate, include the strong ties with Parsis we're having with their Vatan, with their motherland, with that kind of literature, and also including the idea that Parsis were not just a passive recipient. They were really making changes. They were leading these organizations. And then we go to the last section of my presentation, which is Ilmek Shnum, knowledge of bliss. We could translate it in English. It was the first one speaking about Shnum was Behram Shah Naloji Shirov, a Parsi from Surat. He was not a good student. He was stammering. However, he had a fight with his mom. I have no picture of Shirov because he didn't want to leave any. That's why I'm not showing it. He had a fight with his mom when he was a teenager, and he left. He went to Peshawar to stay with an uncle. There are two versions of the stories, but I'm simplifying. And when he was in Peshawar, by accident, he met a caravan of Pathans. Then he discovered that they were wearing Sud and Kusti, so they were Zoroastrians. He was invited in the Mount Damavand in a community called Firdos, a community of Saheb Delan, Master Hearts, where he was initiated into Ilmek Shnum. And the disciples and all the recounts of the time say that Shirov developed some abilities like physiognomy, astrology, geomancy, healing, among others. And also, in these 3 years he spent in Iran, he learned about Ilmek Shnum, which is an esoteric knowledge of the Zoroastrian religion. It's based on a set of laws of nature and introduces new some elements that at that time were not known among the Parsis, like the idea of Nur al-Anbar, an emanationist view of the creation, the concept of reincarnation, a cyclical view of time, among other things. I mean, we could speak for many hours about Shnum because they produced a huge literature and is a very articulated system of beliefs. We don't have obviously evidences of this journey of Shirov in Iran, and even the followers of the teaching of Shirov today, they believe that this place is in another dimension. So even if today we go there, probably we don't see anything. However, I would like to share with you a brief extract of an interview I conducted to Mernosh Palia, who is the great grandson of Behram Shah Shirov. He lives in Mumbai, and I should have this here.
These are holy things to me. Normally, we put them where we do our daily prayers. This object, which is arguably the most dear to us, and it is the most unique. In all my life, I have never put it on in my finger. This is a smaller ring which Behram Shah had on his finger when he went to Demavan. Probably the only object which has gone there, come back. This thing only deserves to be revered, and that's why it stays near our place of worship.
Okay, so I found this fascinating. Thank you very much to Mernosh Palia, who, beyond allowing me to use this video, he also dedicated much time to me and my research when I was in India. He was extremely kind and patient with me. And I found quite fascinating that some members some heirs of the family of the line of Shirov still have some objects of Behram Shah Shirov. Mernosh is not the only one, also other relatives have something. But I found this ring quite fascinating, and is very much connected with the story of the journey to Damavand and Firdos and the initiation of Shirov. So he was 16, 17, 18 when he went to Firdos. This is an approximate period, 1875, 1878. After this experience, he kept silent for long time. Probably was not very interested in publicity, and he began to spread Ilmek Shnum in 1906. By coincidence, he encountered the educationist of Surat, Mancher Kekobad, who was the headmaster of a school. He was giving some lessons, some classes to young Parsis, and Shroff, by coincidence, passed by, and the subject was about Atash, the fire, and he joined this conversation, and since that time, he impressed the audience with his knowledge and his fluency of some languages, including Persian, Arabic, even Avesta, Middle Persian. So he began to be invited to give other talks, classes. He was connected to other Parsis in Mumbai, and then, long story short, he began to lecture also in Mumbai, in Nevada, and in other places. In 1910, the Ilmek Shnum Institute was established. Here we see a brief extract of the constitution in December 1910. And there was a strong collaboration with the Parsi Vegetarian Temperance Society at that time, led by the Masani brothers. They were lecturing, they were publishing books in Gujarati, and also the Fresh Sugar magazine in Gujarati. And we see again the same kind of organizational approach. The printing press really plays a big role. The formalization of organization institutes also really plays a big role in this kind of propagation of ideas. Shroff died in 1927. An important event of his life, among others, I would say, is the proposal of establishing a Zoroastrian Tariqat Sastan, a community of a colony of practitioners, which was aligned with the Fazal movement. They, in 1919, established the Zoroastrian Radi Society, who purchased a piece of land to do this, to create this colony. However, the first ceremonies, if I'm not wrong, performed in 1925, didn't go very well, and Shroff had a breakdown, and it was a bit the declining phase of his experience with Ilmek Shnum. I think the followers of his teaching say that he never received the consent from the Saheb Dilan to really do this. It was too early to introduce this, to join this Fazal movement and establish this Fazil Agyari. However, today we have that colony is called Behram Bagh. I've never been there. I was planning to go when I was in India, but then there was COVID-19 and I had to fly back to Europe. However, I got this picture from Google. I hope it's correct. And it should be the Agyari which we have today in Behram Bagh, which initially was established as the colony as a product of the Zoroastrian Radi Society, as the product of the ideas of Shroff. So the reception of Ilmek Shnum among the Parsis was mixed. There were people enjoying the things Shroff was saying, people against. Those who were interested in preserving the customary forms of religion were obviously very attracted by the message of Shroff, who was making a strong emphasis on the performance of the religious observances, the tarikato, and also the practices in a certain way. And so these Parsis, fond of customary forms of religion, found in Shroff most probably a knowledge to back their positions, which they were looking for. It is important also to remark that, differently from Freemasonry and Theosophy, Ilmek Shnum has a totally different approach. It's very much exclusionary rather than universalist, meaning that, in practical terms, for example, they believe that individuals should marry within their fold and follow the religion they were born into, and this kind of beliefs. So we have a totally different approach. And something else I would like to add on Ilmek Shnum is that scholars have not explored much this esotericism, many times writing wrong things, I believe, about Shnum. And we easily can read on scholarly books that Ilmek Shnum has to be considered the reworking of theosophy or something like this, which I don't believe. I don't agree. By means of textual analysis, when someone really engages with the books of Shroff written in Gujarati, which I did in my limited capacity of understanding Gujarati, one can find strong links with the Persianate area, with Persian language, with Persian beliefs, even very ancient ones. So I think there's a lot to study about this group, and calling it a reworking of theosophy is just an essentialism, is a bit reductionist. I think we should really engage with primary sources before giving statements. So after Shroff, after his death, we have Ilmek Shnum goes on. We have the first generation of Parsis promoting Ilmek Shnum, the very famous From Rose and Jahangir Chiniwala brothers. The first one, probably the most prolific writer on Ilmek Shnum, and the second one was is known as an excellent speaker and about Ilmek Shnum. They could be considered the leaders of the first generation, the ones who really, after Shroff, went on and in propagating Ilmek Shnum. We have then a second generation, Kayan Dastur, a priest, Adi Doctor, again, Kayan Dastur, an excellent speaker, Adi Doctor, very good writer, and Meher Mastermus. Meher Mastermus is interesting because in the 80s, she began to publish and give lectures about Ilmek Shnum. However, her approach began to be much more universalist, so different from the previous approach of other Parsis following Ilmek Shnum. In particular, Mastermus believed that Zoroastrianism can be a universal faith and not just the religion of the Parsi community. So she began to have different ideas compared with other Parsis following Shnum. Somehow she was trying to anticipate the role of that followers of Ilmek Shnum believe Shaber and Barzavan will have in the near future. And this creates a bit of different views and debates within the Shnumist community, if I can use this term. And finally, the current generation, the third generation, I'm here sharing the names of Erbad Marzbana Hatiram and Hanos Mistri. I hope they don't mind exposing them publicly, but I mean, anybody knows them in the community for their association with Ilmek Shnum. Marzbana Hatiram is a priest, and Hanos Mistri is the editor of the newsletter The Parsi Voice, which you can see the picture below. And I'm also here adding a bullet point about US and Canada, because we have people following Ilmek Shnum in Dubai, Australia, New Zealand, etc. But in US and Canada, we have organizations where they publish on Ilmek Shnum, when they run activities on Ilmek Shnum. We have the Mazayazni Connection in California by Siru Mehta and Malcolm Besania, and also in Canada, the Humata organization by Havavi Tarapore. So that's interesting, but is another chapter of my research probably. And finally, as I told so many things about Shnum, I also, and I spent much time in India engaging with the Parsis following Ilmek Shnum. I'm here sharing another very brief contribution to someone who can really say more about Shnum and what Shnum is according to her.
According to me, Ilmek Shnum is a Shnum means it's a knowledge which gives happiness. Ilmek Shnum, the meaning is only giving happiness, and the knowledge which gives happiness, and it's good for our spiritual upliftment, and it's also a way of life, because Ilmek Shnum gives you certain things, certain tarikats, certain principles, which you follow, you really lead a very good, happy and a healthy life.
So
according to me.
Thank you also to Avovi for letting me use this extract of her interview, and thank you for all your help you have given me, and also Ramya's helping when I was in India. And I think what is interesting of this interview of Avovi is that she's saying that Shnum is a way of life. So it's not just an intellectual quest like could have been for Freemasons or for Theosophists. but there's an application, a performativity of these beliefs into life, into the tarikato, into the rituals, which is quite interesting from a religious perspective, let's say. So I'm just going into the concluding remarks. And again, going to the model I was sharing before, there was, during colonial time, a fragmentation of the Parsi priesthood trying to respond to the attacks of John Wilson and to the influence of the West, triggering a need for religious authenticity, which was facilitated, let's say, by reconstruction of an ancient Aryan identity informed by forms of esotericism as a response. So we have the first one, Freemasonry, which is proposing, I'm probably simplifying here, saying Masonic hermeneutics, but I refer to the approach used by Parsi Freemasons in interpreting the religion, the scriptures, the rituals. They were trying to extract universal values from the mythical narratives, the ritual symbolisms, and infer ethical teachings in a universal fashion. Hermeneutics means methods of interpretation, so that's why I'm using this word. When we look at the theosophy, we see that theosophical hermeneutics were a combination of allegorical interpretation of texts, use of some linguistic techniques like the phonetic assonance introduced by the German philologist Max Müller, and also they were making a strong emphasis on the scientific interpretation of the phenomena. When I say scientific, I refer to the discoveries of that time associated with, for example, thermodynamics and these kind of things, which also gave rise in a different context and geographies to mesmerism. And there was a huge production at that time of literature authored by practitioners of spiritism, occultism, mesmerism, using these kind of terms associated with thermodynamics. Also, scientists were using those new discoveries to advance new interpretation of the reality. And again, theosophy, like Freemasonry, was having a very universalist approach. When we go into Shnum, I'm here speaking of Shnumic hermeneutics. First thing to know is that in his books, Shroff uses scientific language in the same fashion of other groups like theosophy and also other occultists and scientists. And what we need to understand here is that it was in the fashion of the literature of the Victorian age. I don't find it a strong evidence to say that Ilmek Shnum is a reworking of theosophy just because Shroff is using terms like magnetism or electrofluid powers, or now I don't remember, but these kind of terms. Which, because it was used by many other organizations, not just the theosophy, it was an indicator of those times. And another point is that the core of the hermeneutics of Shnum is Tawil, which is a method of interpretation widely used across the Persianate by several other religious groups. And the approach is to unveil the inner meaning called Bateni, the occult meaning of scriptures, rather than inferring an understanding of the religion based on the exegesis of text. So this is what I would define as the Shnumic hermeneutics, the Tawil, which was not exclusive of Ilmek Shnum. It's a very old way of approaching the religious knowledge and rituals, and is not associated with the theosophy. Another element is that many of the logato, the technical terms used in Ilmek Shnum, which are labeled as invention of Shroff, they are really not. And some of them are really ancient. I would say also they can come from post-Sassanian times. Apologies. So this is a bit the approach of Ilmek Shnum regarding the interpretation of religion and rituals. And obviously, as I already said before, they have a totally different direction, which is more exclusive. And it differentiates itself from these two Western organizations as a Persian fashion organization, going towards the exclusivism of the Parsi community and different hermeneutical approaches. Conclusions to my talk are that, first thing, I believe esotericism as not to be considered just a random phenomenon or something associated with sects, cults, or just a modern trend with magic, New Age, etc. We have seen how esotericism is a response to social needs and is informed by cultural elements which are prevalent in a given historical context. In our case, is Persia and West. So we see how Freemasonry, Theosophy, Ilmek Shnum show that esotericism among the Parsis spanned from a Masonic rationalist universalism to a theosophical, more enchanted universalism to a Shnumic exclusivism. I'm not able to pronounce this word today. So this is a bit the conclusion. So these are a bit the conclusions of my talk, trying to show that esotericism can be considered as a form of knowledge, and we really should dedicate more time to study this. This is just a picture of what was happening, a small picture, because there are many other things to say about esotericism in colonial times, or what was happening in colonial times, but the relation of esotericism and Zoroastrianism can also be traced back to the past. I think I've concluded. Thank you so much. And
Thank you. Thank you very much. You've had a huge audience and there are lots of questions. First of all, okay, can I put the questions to you?
Yeah, sure.
And then I have lots of questions also, but let me ask you from here. Okay, please comment. This is from London. Please comment on what you would like to share about the concept of achieving the good of all creation holistically for complete happiness that brings happiness to others as guided in the Gathas, from what you have studied in the Parsis and these three esoteric groups.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I would say that the point is universal happiness, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if we go into the universalist approach of Freemasonry, Theosophy, as I was saying, they were trying to extract universal values, brotherhood, charity, benevolence, and we can interpret happiness like a consequence of these approaches. Regarding Ilmek Shnum, the meaning itself means joy, happiness, bliss. So we can really say that Ilmek Shnum, even if it's more exclusive, the message is not necessarily exclusive, it's universal, because the things they are saying are, also true for other groups, religious groups, and other kind of esoteric currents. I would say yes, that probably in an attempt to understand what the religion was, what the authentic Zoroastrianism was, there was a strong emphasis on bringing to light the happy side of the religion, and especially when it comes to perceiving the religion as a way of life. I don't see someone following a religion and doing something that doesn't make her or him happy. So in this, Ilmek Shnum has a very interesting aspect, because it's considered by the Parsis as a way of life. So the aspect of happiness is interesting. And regarding the Gathas, just to conclude, there are different interpretations of the Gathas, which have been used by different groups in different ways, so it's a difficult topic to engage with. But I know that in the audience there are scholars who know much more than me about the Avesta, and if they want to add something.
Okay. Now, when you say charity, that's quite interesting, because the next question by Siddhant Dalve is, what role has Freemasonry played in the growth of business and trade of members of the community?
The rule of Freemasonry. So the problem with Freemasonry is that access to understanding, to knowledge of what is happening, what was happening at that time in Freemasonry is difficult, because there is still a secretive layer. Actually, I'm looking for interviewing Parsi Freemasons if they are happy to speak with me. And so I found some reports of meetings, I found a book, I didn't find much. Now, if there are rules in terms of charity in line with universal values, I don't know if there are strict rules. It depends probably by the craft, by the lodge, by the country. But I think globally, Freemasons are very much recognized for huge works of charity and from health to education to other kind of intervention in society to lift up society. This is what I can say from my point of view.
I think also the creation of the United States Constitution of America, that's important. Okay, very enlightening dissertation, thanks. This is from Firoza and Gino Master, I think I can't read it. They have suggested a book, First Principles of Theosophy by C. Jinardasa and C.W. Leadbeater's Hidden Life in Freemasonry and the Masters and the Path, the third book, will help those who want to know more. Okay, a lot of people are asking, thank you so much. Is there any way we can contact you or read books you have written? Can you please put your email if you are interested? Okay, now you've got a grandmaster talking to you. Even today, Parsis, this is Cyrus Engineer of Delhi, very big businessman, whom you must interview. Even today, Parsis are active in Freemasonry. The district Grand Master of Scottish and English Grand Lodges in India are Parsis. Cyrus Engineer, if you don't mind, I'll share your number with Mariano, and that would be wonderful. From Hyderabad, a really scholarly and fascinating presentation. This is Parviz. Would love to hear more from Mariano on the esoteric aspects, especially of Ilme Kushnum. Then the next one is, oh God, there are lots of questions. This is from Parviz Daruwala. What do we really mean by esotericism, especially in the light of these three movements? And how are these actually practiced today, especially Kushnum? She's given you an email, so I will send this on to you. Kenaz has also given you an email to contact. So there are lots of people who are asking you.
Yeah. Can I say something on the
Please.
question of Perves? I
Yes,
think
please.
that's a very good point. The way we study esotericism is biased by the Western views. So when we say esotericism, there's a field of study called Western esotericism. There's no systematic study of how the esotericism or this mystical aspect of life is experienced by, in this case, Parsis themselves. So we often infer our own beliefs and scholarly structures into these mystical aspects of the Zoroastrian religion. Zoroastrianism as seen as an esoteric religion since many years, from the Western interpretation of the figure of Zoroastrian, Zarathustra, the Chaldean oracles, the Magi, all these stories. However, the question I would really like to answer is how Parsis live esotericism. What do they think is esotericism? So we don't have a field of study called Zoroastrian esotericism as such. And probably with knowing the very ancient history of this religion, and the fact that today there are still many groups approaching the religion from an esoteric point of view, I would say that there is a ground to really build this area of study and build a theoretical framework to engage with it.
Mariano, now I want to ask you something, because you mentioned in the second generation K.N. Dastur. But I personally have worked very closely with Dastur Meji, the 16th Dastur Meji Rana. K.N. Dastur was the 17th Dastur Meji Rana. And Meji Rana was one of the great Shnumists and a person who understood esotericism from the point of being able to recite nirangs, give us nirangs, pray, give us special prayers, all sorts of ceremonies which have been unfortunately left unrecorded. Why did you not count him among the second generation?
That's my mistake. I mean, there are so many people I should have mentioned. The slide was short. Margirana was a very important Shinumist, follower of Shinum, and I think one of his most important contributions, from my point of view, from the research point of view, was a beautiful dictionary of Logato, of Shinumic terms, which has helped me a lot. So I would say that today the main two glossaries are that of Mergirana and another one of Shroff, which is in the appendix of the Cordia Vesta, written by Shroff. But this one of Dastur Mergirana is much bigger and it's written later than Shroff, obviously, and has been extremely useful to my work. So when I had to choose among people belonging to generations, yes, you are right. Dastur Mergirana should have been there, and I picked Ken Dastur because he's the closer to. He just passed away a few years ago, so he's closer to Parsis. So I'm sure many of them still remember him.
Mariano, would you like to ask the audience some of your questions?
Oh.
Because I know there's so many people here who can give you some brilliant ideas, and they've already given you lots of emails to contact, etc. You already met one Grand Mason, so please, whatever question you want to ask, which you couldn't do because of COVID.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the Tavis. We were speaking about this the other time in the Tavis, and I'm curious to know if there are Parsis who still have Tavis in their places from their parents, or if they are still today. I understand a couple of priests, they still write nirangs for healing purposes or for other purposes, but it's so difficult to find, and it's a fascinating topic.
Anybody here who would be willing to share their knowledge of the nirangs, especially from the priesthood who I know are present here, nirangs and taviz, which I hope you know what a taviz is, many of you, because they're not only Zoroastrians here. We've got people from across all communities and different parts of the world. The nirangs, if any of you have seen a Jamaspi, or if any of you are Irani, would you have a taviz in your house? Would you have any sort of astrological charts of your birth from the Zoroastrian point of view? Would you have any special nirangs in your homes like the people of Bharuch and the old homes used to have? I'm putting this question on behalf of Mariano to anybody here. If you want to speak, could you please raise your hand? Yes, Jaru and Karishma from London have raised their hand. Can you please unmute them, administrator? Yeah. Mariano, you've got some. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shernas Kama. There are nirangs that are available through Zoroastrians.net, which talk about both the Gujarati and the Avesta versions of the nirang. Ervat Solipi Dastur, who was in the late Ravan Shah, Ervat Solipi Dastur, has also given good detail about this. I'll put the link of the Pahalvi nirang for the home front door into the chat box.
This so
often refers to the Airyamanem Ishyam Yazamaide concept, the concept of the Airyama Yazata, which refers to protection and fellowship. So the Zoroastrian Daina is very strong on happiness and fellowship. And many of these nirangs refer to both these concepts, which are very strong also in the Gathas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karishma. Thank you. So you've got a link, please, Karishma, because I'm sure lots of people want this link copied. And there's already another, if anybody else can share even simple things which we as children have seen priests do. the Chavini wreath to catch a person who has told a lie or who has stolen something. Can anyone talk about this, please, especially from among the priests? Anyone would like to talk about this? The Chavini wreath? Anyone? Put your hand up, please. I can't see anyone. Okay, so let me go on to the next question. Okay, there are two questions now. Okay, Mariano, this is a very personal question, so you're free to say you don't want to talk about it. This is from Parvis Daruwala. Mariano, what religion do you follow, if any? And how many of you are personally influenced by Zoroastrian teachings and practices, since you seem to have a lot of knowledge?
Thank you so much for saying it seems. It's an appearance that I have a lot of knowledge about Zoroastrianism, actually. But so I'm Italian, as you can tell from my strong accent, and I was raised as a Christian, as a Catholic. I got my sacraments, and that's the way. I mean, I belong to that culture. And obviously, I'm very much interested in Zoroastrianism. I began to study it with Professor Almut Hinze in 2015 here in London, which is a philologist. So, who is a philologist? So, it implies a lot of engagement with the Avestan and also Middle Persian texts. It was fascinating, and then as you can tell, I have a personal interest in the esoteric aspect of religion. So. I was asking myself what is the esoteric side of Zoroastrianism. That's why then I began researching a bit more. So that's I'm fascinated by Zoroastrian religion, and I would really like to get more of its esoteric side. So that's I hope I answered your question.
There's a question from Cyrus Engineer. Can anyone share light on Ratan Bhagat Ni Khan and Jiva Mai no Divo? What are the backgrounds? Have you heard of this? Ratan Bhagat Ni Khan and Jiva Mai no Divo. Anybody?
I have heard of Ratan Bhagat Ni Khan. It's at least my grandparents were from Iran, and they always told us that if you lost something, you pray to Ratan Bhagat, and when you found it, you would distribute a spoonful of sugar to everybody. But that's all we were taught, and that's how, I mean, unbelievably, every time we would find the item. So no idea if it.
And Jiva Mai no Divo, does anybody here like to share what they know of Jiva Mai no Divo? Anyone? So you got one more thing to discover, Mariano. Jiva Mai no Divo. We had a very interesting session. Okay. How do Parsis? Okay, Siddhant Dalvi is still concerned more about whether we are people who the esoteric side has helped us succeed. The question to everyone here is, how do Parsis outstand in almost all fields? If we compare the population percentage, judiciary, business, arts, etc.
Well, I don't have the numbers, but I think it's quite impressive, the contributions they have given to several fields of human activities. From really, I think they have played a role everywhere, especially in colonial times, in the last 200, 300 years. Considering that is a very tiny community, the impact of Parsis has been huge, and I don't know if it's comparable to any other community, honestly.
There are, what is this? Okay. So is there anybody else who has anything to share over here who would like to also, otherwise, Mariano, can you just, okay, sorry. Here you've got, okay. This is Jaru and Karishma replying to Siddhant, Siddhant, sorry. The key, she says, is Yashna Ha 43.1. This is absolutely what we all learn. Happiness comes to one who spreads happiness to others. as Ashur Zarathustra guided, with Vakshatra inside, and on the outside, basically inside and outside, you desire and request power to do good. That is what, of course, all of us learn when we say our prayers and when we wear the Sadra Kasti every day. So I think, Mariano, you have created a lot of interest. There are people power on the good mind and on righteousness. Now people want a WhatsApp group. So Mariano, you'll have to guide the WhatsApp group and all their questions.
No, I will learn. I'm just making questions and learning. I do not guide
Yes,
anything.
yes. Cyrus says, because Cyrus engineer, Parsis succeed because of a prime value system coming. Yes, exactly. From the Hashem vow and the Yatha Video, good thoughts, good words, good deeds, which when practiced creates successful personalities. I think they all agree with that. I think that is true, that ultimately it is your action which counts. I'm quoting again from the Gathas, and I believe that action, not inaction, higher stands. I'm not quoting exactly, but I think that is the Yashna 46. Action, not inaction, higher stands. So it's not just being taking in spirituality, mysticism, etc., but working with that power within to create power for others. I think that is the whole point, because I think many of you will notice that when we pray for ourselves, maybe the prayer doesn't happen, doesn't come true. When we pray for others, the transference of energy is so positive that it happens to the other. So let's all pray for each other. I think the world requires it. Thank you so much, Mariano. I'm sure nobody wants to leave because it doesn't seem that anybody wants to go away. Thank you for a wonderful session. And okay, somebody is given numbers for getting daily posts. Mariano, you have lots of homework to do. And from Russia, you have very interesting. This is Svetlana. She's one of the members of the Russian Academy. Thank you, Mariano, for a wonderful lecture. Interestingly, there are several levels of the perceptions of esotericism. I am interested in your methodology, but maybe via email. And a friend of yours, Ruzbe Hodiwala, thank you, Mariano. Thank you, Parzor. Okay, you got lots of phone numbers to catch up with and lots of people to interview. I hope you enjoyed the session as much as we have. Thank you so much. And thank you, Matab. Thank you very much for all the effort you put in for every Friday forum. And yes, we will take down the numbers, and there are lots of questions. I think, yes, it is very important to do good deeds. There's a question to all of us. And more than just reciting prayers, we should live our life, which is with a prayer. I think that is the more important thing. You don't have to sit in a room or an agyari or a church to pray. I think you can pray as you are driving, as you are walking, as you're doing everything. So I think that is in our Zoroastrian tradition, that is much more important. There is one part of esoteric Zoroastrianism which talks about good thoughts are like the stars, good good words are like the moon, but good deeds are like the sun, because they provide life to everything. So we will add all the names to the WhatsApp group. Adil Desai is saying thank you to you, and so is Farad Tarapur. And before I end, may I please invite you next week when we're going to have a very interesting history of Bharuch by Dr. Meher Kelawala Mistry, who is from Bharuch. And of course, Bharuch is one of the oldest cities in the world. So please do join us. There's a very long quote, but I'm afraid we are completely out of time. But this, I think, is for you, Mariano. So you will have to
I
look
will read in due
at
time.
this very long quote from Mino and be in touch with him. And there's another mention, sorry, Okay. So I thank you to thank you to Mariano, etc.
Thank you to you for having me, for inviting to talk about this subject, and hope we can keep on the ball rolling. And thank you very much to you for the help you give in my research. It's
Not at all.
great.
Not at all. And we had no problems, which I was expecting. Okay. God bless. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
And
you,
yes,
everybody.
we will take down your numbers, everybody, and we will include you in all our sessions. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Okay. Bye. God bless. Bye. Thank you.